Hey y'all, and welcome back to the pod. Today's story is about progenitors, about the people that came before us, our families. And this is a common subject in children's literature. It's a common subject in literature broadly, because all of us have progenitors. Some of us know our progenitors, and a few of us even like our progenitors. And so that's a commonality that is easy to access in storytelling that we can instantly grab our readers with. The problem with that often, though, is that we know our families deeply. And so we feel that we can share stories of family with those who are not of our family, and that it will have the same sorts of impacts on them that they have on us. Take, for instance, the story of my grandfather. My grandfather used to sit in his rocking chair when he was dying of cancer and tell this story over and over again, and it gave him such joy and brought such laughter to him that he could barely breathe at times. It was simply the story of a mother cat who gave birth to kittens. For whatever reason, he got it into his head to tie bags around the heads of these kittens and watch them as they stumbled into each other and ran around trying to get the bags off. This is a story that I probably heard 100 times as a child. How does it make you feel? I'm sure in our modern time that you have some resistance to this, that it sounds like cruelty. And even if you are willing to grant some sort of license because of the alterity of the past, because of the differentness of the time that he came from, you still have reservations about this. And I could tell you that my grandparents raised me, that they raised me at great cost to themselves. They were very old when they took up my care, and they were not expecting to have to raise another child at that point in their lives. And I think that it in many ways wasted them, and that might make you feel better about it in some ways. But then I could also tell you that my grandparents had the kind of easy Southern racism that we see in media and film all the time, and that might change things too. There's just a lot that goes into the constitution of family that makes these stories insular, that makes them not portable to the outside. Really, if we think about the work of fiction, we can begin to understand why something like a novel needs hundreds of pages for us to become truly attached to characters that will stay with us for the rest of our lives. Because in the reality of our lived lives, we have years of experience with the people that form us, with the people that deeply matter to us, with our family. And this is something that's operating very, very, very much in today's book. And we're going to get into it after the break. I'll see you then. Welcome to Toddling the Stacks, a human-produced children's literature podcast for adults. I'm your host, Sean, an award-winning educator with a PhD from Princeton English. In my professional life, I think a lot about the Victorian, the environmental humanities, and the history of the book. But in my personal life, I'm the father of a toddler, and she reads hundreds of books a year. She's taught me that everyone should be reading picture books, and this podcast will show you why. All right, so this week we're looking at 1941's They Were Strong and Good by Robert Lawson. This is the guy of Ferdinand fame, also for Mr. Popper's Penguins, and for Rabbit Hill, the Newbery Award winning book. So a big name in the field. All of today's works that we're talking about, and I mean all of them, are happily available in the Internet Archive or on Open Library, and they will be linked to in the show notes. You'll be able to look at all of these in depth if you choose to on the website www.toddlingthestacks.com. So what is this text? What is They Were Strong and Good? It is the story of Robert Lawson's progenitors, the people who are responsible for him, his paternal and maternal grandparents, and his parents. Just their stories alongside illustrations, prefaced by a foreword that explains the importance of this book in that he's hoping to show through these characters the past of our nation. These are exemplars for him. They're just examples of the great people that formed our nation. And he hopes that through these specific examples, we can gain a generalized understanding of the kind of work that was needed to make America great. And the exact wording that he uses is that none of his progenitors were great or famous, but they were strong and good. They worked hard and had many children. They all helped to make the United States the great nation it now is. And we're going to look at that quote more closely in a little bit, but let's talk about the people that are in this text. There's Lawson's maternal grandfather, who was a Scotch sea captain who brings home trinkets for his friends from Panama. And there's Lawson's maternal grandmother, who was a farm girl whose father takes her to the market one day where she meets this Scotch sea captain and marriage ensues. There's Lawson's mom, The important part to know about Lawson's mom, apparently, is that she was so scared of the Indians and lumberjacks of her home that she joined a convent. This is the part that he chooses to pass down to us. There's his paternal grandfather, who was a British national who lived in the U.S. as a traveling preacher fighting Satan. And there's the paternal grandmother, who is a woman that liked his paternal grandfather and got married to him. That's the important part to know about her. And then there's the father, Lawson's father, who was wounded fighting for the Confederacy, resulting in a lifelong limp that attracted Lawson's mother to him. This is the story in a nutshell. By the numbers, that means that 1/3 of the characters in this book have fought for the Confederacy. We spend 21 pages on Dad. We spend 12 pages on the maternal grandmother, 4 of which are actually about how dirty New Jersey is. 9 pages on the maternal grandfather. 9 pages on Mom, 4 of which are actually about how bad Minnesota is to live in, and the remainder of which are actually about how cool convents are. And then 5 pages on the paternal grandfather, and just 2 pages or 40 words on the paternal grandmother, which is enough to say, she liked my grandfather and got married to him. If it seems like I don't like this book, you're onto something here. But this is Caldecott number 4, and we are, as you may remember, working our way through the Caldecott series, one book at a time. So previously, we've looked at Animals of the Bible by Dorothy Lathrop and Helen Dean Fish, which, if you remember that episode early on, it was just pictures of animals from the Bible alongside quotes from the Bible that in some way was meant to be a children's book, even though it couldn't possibly be. There was Mei Li, the book about the little girl in China who paid her brother to smuggle her into the New Year Fair and her experiences there, by Thomas Handforth. This is the book that was deeply invested in lithography and really explored the page. That book actually beat out Wanda Gagg's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, so really stiff competition that year. The last episode that we did on the Caldecott was Abraham Lincoln, which beat out Madeline, of all things. This is the reason that Madeline is a Caldecott honor book and not a Caldecott winner, is Abraham Lincoln. It's important to know that this is a short history because Lawson plays deeply in it. He has already won 2 Caldecott Honor Awards, the sort of runner-up award for this prize. In 1938, the first year of the award, he won it for 4 and 20 Blackbirds, a collection of old songs and nursery rhymes that was assembled by Helen Dean Fish, also the assembler of the Bible quotes from Animals of the Bible that won the award that year. This is a really fun chromolithographic work that is linked on the website. It really comes in the fine tradition of Ralph Caldecott himself, of getting these older sort of nursery rhymes and poems and illustrating them and just putting them out for the world. Really fun book that you should take a look at, and it really highlights Lawson's style in a nice way. In 1939, Lawson wins for Wee Gillis, the story of a young boy torn between 2 competing familial modes of living. His family is from the Scottish Highlands and I guess the lowlands as well. And he has to decide how he wants to live, and he forms in himself this sort of hybrid. This also really hard to place as a children's book because it is quite long. It is approaching not quite middle grade literature, but it's certainly, if we think of picture books in that 4 to 8 range, much closer to the 8 range of readability. And the illustrations there, he has a lot of fun with. He has a lot of fun with faces. It's much less realist and much more magical. In 1940, the one year that he doesn't win anything from the Caldecott Committee, he publishes a book called Just for Fun, super well illustrated and creatively illustrated as well. It's something that really is strongly reminiscent of his work in Ferdinand, but even more whimsical. I think if Lawson's going to be picked for a single book to win this award, it should have been Just for Fun. That also available on the website, and I really want you to take a look at that one. It is almost unobtainable, even in the used book market. There's only a few copies available that I've seen. In 1941, we get to They Were Strong and Good, and he finally wins the Caldecott Award, and it's the last time that the committee will take a look at any of his works. There's only one Caldecott honor that is awarded in 1941, and that's April's Kittens by Claire Newbery. She similarly wins a lot of honor awards, but she never ends up getting the Caldecott herself. The illustrations for this are just beautiful in my mind. Some of my friends mentioned that they thought that they looked almost like spray paint stencils. They're almost certainly lithographic crayon on lithographic stone, but it's just these black cats. And the way that Newbery gets the limbs differentiated in these blobs of black is really, I think, creative and just kind of gorgeous. I don't know. If you agree with me or if you don't agree with it, let me know. But this is a book that we might actually do its own episode on at some point, but nevertheless loses. So They Were Strong and Good. And so this gets us to the why of why we're doing this episode today. But as I often have with these Caldecott winners, I've struggled to understand one, how they won the award, and two, how they were received in their moment. Because not only is this an award-winning text, but as you'll note, if you take a look at the Internet Archive version, it also gets a second edition 1 month after its first edition. So just wildly popular. Just why? Like, what was making people gravitate towards it? And I want to be fair to books that I don't understand, right? I want to try to get down into it and think more deeply about why I don't understand them. And so, again, I don't like this book. And why don't I like this book? The first thing is the images. One, compared to Lawson's other works, this is the book that least deserves the Caldecott. It is phoned in. It's amateurish, especially by his own standards. If you zoom in on any of these drawings, you'll see things that are just sort of slapdash. You'll see faces that are just caricatures alongside faces that are deeply, deeply dwelled on. You'll see seagulls whose wings are so disproportionate that it could have only been a mistake. And there's also a sort of racism that's involved in a lot of these images. The black figures that are in here, one, are caricatures of racist tropes. But two, if you look specifically at the moment where Lawson's mother is afraid of the Indians stealing food from her mother, there's a black servant in the background whose face literally is just demonic and black in such a way that it's hard to forgive. So that's the first element of it. As far as the illustrations go, and these are the things that are meant to account for the award, they're just not there. April's Kittens, far better work than this. And so it starts to feel like a consolation prize. As I mentioned last week with the Delairs, that work felt like a consolation prize, that we are considering a whole body of work rather than considering the individual work. That's number one. But number two is just the text itself. And I think what we start to have here is what in the field of literary criticism we might think of in terms of kinship versus family. Kinship includes the idea of family. It's just this notion of people that are networked together through bonds that, to riff off of Judith Butler, are always breakable. They may be elective, they may be bonds of blood, they may be forced upon us, but there's always this notion that they carry within them the ability to be broken. And that notion separates kinship from family. And it allows the notion of kinship to be expanded outwards in ways that family can't. So Robert Lawson is clearly just talking about his family, but he wants to expand that notion to a larger system of the United States. He wants to say, this is my family. These are representative of the same people everywhere in this country that did the same kind of work. And these people were strong and good, and they had many children. And because you can see it here in microcosm, we can move outwards into macrocosm of the United States and just reproduce this endlessly into a kinship network that is understandable to everyone and creates this sort of patriotism and creates this sort of understanding of national identity that is akin to family. In the era of 1941 makes quite a lot of sense. It's something that you want to do. But at the same time, the picture that Lawson is presenting is far too insular, is far too unformed for us to hope to expand it in the way that he wants. He simply doesn't know enough about his own family to create this work. And it doesn't help his case at all that such a large portion of his family were Confederates. Because how can you make the notion of kinship out of people who fought against this family, against a war that was famously brother against brother? The hope of reconciliation there isn't addressed at all. We're just supposed to accept that his father and his grandfather were good people because they fought for the Confederacy. And that can never work, right? That's something that can never be settled against this. He knows these people. He knows them deeply. He's heard these stories all of his life, which is something that he talks about in the foreword. And just like with my stories of my own grandparents, that forgives these things for him, but it does not forgive them for the rest of his audience. And that insularity is what breaks that moment of him attempting to move forward from the family unit that he understands into this kinship unit of nationality that he expects his audience to understand. And the work just fails at that point. This is not patriotism. This is the unquestioning assumption that ownership of land, that existence in a place creates valor, that national identity is itself an argument for valor, that national identity is itself, in itself, something worthy of celebration. And this is not what makes the country the great nation that it is now. Working hard, having many children, being strong and good is not what makes the country what it is now. It is the individual, the lived lives of the people that lived here, our acceptance of those people, and their individual works that can then be reflected outwards as macrocosm of a pluralistic and wildly diverse and wildly successful country that makes this place a great place. It's not just simply the fact that we are Americans and that we are, as a result, great. It is that the people that lived here have done great things. One of those great things was fighting the Civil War to end slavery. Of course, I know things aren't that simple. I know that we have to go more deeply than that. But in a children's book, this unquestioned assumption, deeply problematic. And it begins to point again towards these values of the Caldecott Award that we talked about last time. Because we have now enough data points to start to form a straight line. We can look at any two of these together and form ideas about what we might think is happening with the Caldecott. But when we start to look at them as a whole now, we start to see that this maybe, rather than being an award that was given because of the ability of the illustrator, at best, if that's the case, this is a consolation award. This is Robert Lawson getting the award because they recognize that maybe he should have gotten it before, or because of the totality of the body of his work. This is the least of his works that's been considered so far. Instead, I think we're again looking at content. And you can disagree with me here. You can think that it's me that's looking at content, and I would accept that argument. We can hash that out. But if we look at what's happening, I see in this a reaction one to Abraham Lincoln being the winner last time, a way of consolidating a readership that is still dealing with the after effects of the Civil War, even in 1941. And if we know our country's history well enough, that isn't a problematic statement. This is certainly happening, and it's certainly happening in the space of World War II approaching. And I think that we are starting to see the same sort of values that I've already mentioned, the sort of traditional Christian values being lauded here. We have a preacher who travels the nation and preaching against Satan, railing against Satan. We have a mother that joins a convent, but also is somehow a mother later on. We never really understand how that happens. We see the celebration of ruralism, of this sort of anti-urbanity and anti-modernity continuing that we saw first with Animals of the Bible, and then we saw again in the celebration of the sort of bucolic life that Mei Lee lives, and we saw again in Abraham Lincoln and the upbringing that he had that informed his presidency, the deeply sort of isolationist upbringing that made him the great man that could lead this country. All of these anti-modern and anti-urbanity. And then we have this again here. We have it with the railing against New Jersey. I mean, two of these pages are about how dirty New Jersey is today. And the railing against Minnesota with its ethnic populations of lumberjacks from Canada and Indians and people of color against a core of whiteness. And I think this is going to continue in the next two works that we deal with, certainly. We'll see it again in Make Way for Ducklings. We'll see it again in The Little House, where we'll talk about it more. This is becoming, and at this time, a deeply conservative award. And I don't think that's something, again, that we should be surprised by, but it's something that we'll continue to track. And I'll be very interested to see where the turn starts to happen. As for Addie's reaction to this, she did not read it. I was not going to expose her to this. She wouldn't have sat through it anyway. I don't think you should read it. There's just, frankly, no reason to, unless you're a Caldecott completionist or someone that's interested deeply in the history of children's literature. And it's a shame that this was chosen instead of something like Lawson's book just for fun. It is kind of a stain on the legacy of someone that is deeply associated with great works like Ferdinand and Mr. Popper's Penguins. This is not the text that I would have chosen to have him remembered by. And that's unfortunate, but we can't change history, right? We can only change the future. All right, folks. Thanks for listening. As always, stay safe, get your kids to the library, and keep on reading together. Bye, y'all.
This has been Toddling the Stacks. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube or your podcatcher of choice for new episodes every Monday, and follow us on Insta, Blue Sky, and Facebook for the latest updates. If you like what you hear, leave us a review. Keep up with Adeline's reading now, find links to buy your favorites, and more at toddlingthestacks.com. Address questions or concerns to pod, that's P-O-D, at toddlingthestacks.com. Graphics for today's show were created by Emily Tatro. Make a website so people can hire you, Emily. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.